1. My neighbor has been beckoning my children from his window at night. I 33M. Live in Texas with my daughter, Alicia 8F, and my son Jay 4M. Their mom has been out of the picture for the past 2 years, not dead, just a piece of shit. And I've managed pretty well as a single father. The 3 of us lived in a 2-bedroom in a nice neighborhood. I've got a solid job, and the kids are thankfully healthy. Everything was smooth sailing until one night, 2 months ago, in which I was awoken by Jay poking me in the face. He was sobbing violently, though I recognized it as the "I'm afraid" kind of crying, as opposed to the "I'm hurt" kind of crying, which made me a little less worried. Jay's always been nightmare prone, so I assumed that's what was causing him distress. When I asked him what was wrong though, he said, "The man in the next house is making scary faces at me." I'd heard my fair share of Jay's stories about monsters terrorizing him from the dark corners of his bedroom, but this was something new. I assumed he meant our neighbor's house, and the lack of fantastical elements in his description made me uneasy. It felt too specific to be one of his usual nightmares. I got out of bed with Jay in tow and walked to my kids' room. Alicia was awake in the top bunk. From the soft glow of their nightlight, I could see her crossing her arms and scowling down at her little brother. I didn't turn on any lights to give myself a better view of the outdoors and peered out the bedroom window. Their window had curtains on it, but for once they hadn't been drawn all the way, and there was a small opening between them through which Jay must have looked out. One side of the neighbor's house, the one to our left, if you looked at the front of our house from the street, was visible from Alicia and Jay's room. There were 2 windows on the neighbor's side of the house, but it was too dark inside to see anything. I recalled from what I'd seen in the daylight that the window on the left, the one closest to the front of the house, was the kitchen. I wasn't sure what the window on the right was, as it always had its curtains drawn. I asked Alicia if she'd seen anything, and she shook her head. "He's always having nightmares and crying. I don't want to share a room with him anymore, Dad. I never get any sleep, it's not fair." Of course, hearing that made Jay start crying again, so I let him sleep in my room for the night. He has this TMNT indoor camping tent that he prefers to his actual bed. Honestly, at that point, I half suspected his nightmare to be a ploy to get me to let him camp. Anyway, I guess I'm a total pushover, because he slept in that tent in my room for the next 2 nights. On the 3rd night, I was again woken up, but this time by Alicia, who was standing over me and shaking my arm. That kid hadn't woken me up in the middle of the night for years. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "The neighbor was making faces at me." Those words, and the fear in my daughter's voice, really put me on edge. I closed the curtains when I said goodnight. "Did you open them?" "Only a little, but it's 'cause I heard a weird noise." "What did you hear?" Alicia couldn't recall exactly. According to her, she had gotten out of bed to see what was going on, and when she lifted the curtain, she saw a light on in the neighbor's window. The curtains in the back room had been drawn back, and our neighbor was standing in his house, right up against the window frame. What was he doing? Alicia thought for a moment, and then made an expression I never want to see on my child's face, or anyone else's for that matter, ever again. I won't do it justice by describing it, but it looked something like this. First, she smiled with both sets of teeth, so that there was a little open sliver between the rows, and then she furrowed her eyebrows. She inclined her head towards me, kind of Kubrick's-esque, and strained the muscles in her neck. The worst part, though, was what she did with her hands. She held out her left arm, forearm up. Then she clenched her right hand into a fist and moved it back and forth rapidly over her forearm. Poor thing described it as playing the violin, but it seemed pretty obvious to me that my neighbor was pantomiming cutting. Disturbed, I told Alicia to stop and to not make either the expression or the gesture again. I was angry and confused. My neighbor, a man in his 40s, was a bit of a recluse, but he had seemed normal enough in the 3 or 4 times I'd spoken to him. I couldn't fathom why he would do something like that to my kids. After asking Alicia a few more questions, I realized that my neighbor might not have done anything technically, or at least legally wrong. It wasn't against the law to make inappropriate gestures in your own home, but it seemed like he was targeting my kids specifically. Legal or not, I planned to have a little chat with him the following morning. My last question to Alicia was if our neighbor had made any other gestures, and she nodded. Then, she started making beckoning, come here motions with both of her hands. I had Alicia sleep in my room for the night as well. I also checked out the window in my kids' room, but like before, I saw nothing. The house was completely dark. The next morning, before work, and after dropping Alicia and Jay off to school, I spent a good 5 minutes knocking on my neighbor's front door. I figured he was home since his car was in the driveway, but he never answered the door. Eventually, I had to leave for work, and as I was walking away, I turned around quickly to see if he was watching me. He was. The coward eye saw him for a split second at the front window before he ducked beneath the sill and out of view. Clearly, the guy had problems. I yelled out to him to stop fucking with us, and then left. That same night, I put a plan in motion. While my kids slept in my room, I hung out in theirs. It was a Friday night, and I was ready to pull an all-nighter so that I could catch my neighbor in the act. Although I trusted my kids, I wanted to confirm that there was actually something nefarious going on before I escalated things. I made sure the house was locked up and all the curtains drawn, tucked my kids in, and sat on the floor under the window in their room. At around 9, I started marathoning Midnight Mass on my phone. I didn't want to wear headphones and miss any strange sounds, so I kept the volume low and mostly read subtitles. At midnight, I started to hear strange sounds. Like Alicia said, it's a bit hard to describe. Best I can do is that it was this low, repeated clicking sound. You know the CHK sound you make to beckon a horse? It was something like that. All I knew is that the sound was undoubtedly coming from a person. After a few minutes of this, the sound switched to what I think was supposed to be a whistle, but it came out all wrong, like someone sucking breath in through their teeth. The sound was so crisp that the neighbor's window must have been open, which was an unsettling thought, given that there was only around 15 feet of space between our houses. Certain that the neighbor was at his window, and that this was my best chance to see him, I stood up and pulled the curtain back in one motion. I saw him right away. There was a dim light on in his room, allowing me to see that horrible expression Alicia had made the night prior. It was one thing to see my child's recreation, but it was far more frightening on an adult. His window was indeed open, and his arms were stuck out into the cold night, violently swiping against each other in a grotesque mimicry of self-harm. When he saw me, and realized that he was looking at another grown man, and not some poor child, he stopped his erratic motions. His cartoonish grin faded, and another, more genuine emotion settled over his features. Rage. The man grabbed the window and slammed it shut, then closed the curtains with the same forcefulness. I let my own curtain fall. I was a little shell-shocked, I think. Of course, I was perturbed by the sight of the man, by his face and his movement, and the fact that he'd been doing that for who knows how many nights now, in an attempt to frighten my kids. However, another detail stuck out as even more concerning to me, which was the fact that I genuinely wasn't sure if the man I had just seen was my neighbor. I'd seen him so few times in the years I'd lived in that house, and I was having trouble conjuring up his face. I sat on the floor for a minute, my blood thundering in my ears. I definitely had enough evidence at that point to call the cops, right? Just as I was about to pull out my phone, I heard a tremendous smack against the glass of the bedroom window. After a brief hesitation, I pulled the curtain back again. There were no lights on in the neighbor's house, and there was also no one outside from what I could see. I pulled the curtains back a little further and saw a handprint in the top corner of the window pane. It's worth noting that our house is on a raised foundation, and that particular window is very tall, so even though the window is on the first floor, the man outside would have needed an insane vertical to get his hand up there. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I explained the situation to them, I quickly walked around the house to see if I could catch a glimpse of the man. My last stop was my bedroom. Once inside, I locked the doors and, while still on the phone with the operator, I took my handgun out of the safe in my closet. My heart was beating out of my damn chest, but I knew I had to stay calm, even more so when I saw that Alicia was awake and looking out of the tent at me. I reassured her in as few words as I could, whispering that we were okay, but we had to stay very quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed, my firearm ready and my ears straining. My kids' tent was in the corner, and to the left of the tent, in the middle of the wall and directly across from where I sat, was a window. After what felt like an eternity, I saw something. It was a cloudless night, and the moonlight was bright enough that I could see a silhouette through the white curtains. The dark shape was nebulous at first, but became more clear as the man outside stepped closer to the window. Somehow, he knew which room we were in. The silhouette didn't move for several minutes, and I remember being thankful that, from the angle at which she sat, Alicia couldn't see it. Then, something happened that I couldn't entirely wrap my head around. The man stepped back from the glass and raised his arms, making a Y shape with his body and his limbs. Only, his arms were far too long. They seemed to be double the length that they should have been, each arm about the same length as his entire body. I thought at first that he was holding something, maybe two pipes that just appeared to be an extension of his limbs, but I could clearly see two hands at the ends of the extremities. I could see 5 fingers on each hand, flopping around slightly as the man brought his arms closer to the window. Thud, thud, thud. I stood up and readied myself to shoot, but just then the sounds of sirens pierced the quiet night. The man outside banged his hands against the window one last time, and then it was as if someone had sliced his arms at the elbows. His forearms seemed to shear right off, and the man took off running before they so much as hit the ground. When the police officers announced themselves, I answered the door and explained the situation to them. 2 officers, a man and a woman, asked me a few questions about my neighbor, which I assumed was necessary to establish probable cause for a search. Once finished, they told me to stay inside, with the doors locked, while they investigated the neighbor's house. I watched them through the window of Alicia and Jay's room. They knocked on the neighbor's door, and when no one answered, they tried the front door handle. I watched the unlocked door swing open. The 2 looked at one another, and then entered. I'm not sure what they found inside that house. All I know is that when they emerged a few moments later, they both looked very disturbed. When I went outside to ask what they had found, the female officer told me simply, "Your neighbor's dead." The rest of the night was a blur of strangers in uniforms filing in and out of my neighbor's home. Some came to my porch afterwards to ask me questions, and none offered me any answers. They moved with tight-lipped efficiency, their faces guarded, their words clipped. At one point, I wandered to the side of the house and found several people photographing something on the ground outside my bedroom window. Before they could ask me to leave, I made out the gruesome shape of 2 human arms. The kids and I have been staying in my parents' apartment for months, and I think everyone, even Jay, is getting tired of the cramped living situation. We can't stay in the house. Lisha is way too traumatized for that, and I wouldn't be comfortable staying there while the murderer is still at large anyway. I want to sell the damn house, but our story going semi-viral is making that difficult. After all, who would want a house that, thanks to the news, has become permanently associated with phrases like dismemberment and days of torture and victim barely recognizable as human? Story 2. My inheritance had some odd rules. My grandpa was an odd guy. He was clearly wealthy, but no one was ever sure how. He lived frugally, in a small house on a quarter of an acre, with a sensible car, and nothing too fancy in the house. If you'd driven past it, you would have assumed some old-timer on a pension was just moldering away his golden years there. And you would have been right in some ways. Where he showed his wealth was in his generosity. Grandpa liked to give. He gave the best Christmas presents, had the best candy for Halloween, donated to charities, and liked to see people happy. If you asked him how he could afford to be so generous, however, he would always just wink and say he had his way. Not even my grandmother knew where his money came from, and they were married for 50 years. So when he died, we all wondered who would inherit his mysterious fortune. My cousins had loved Grandpa, grandkids always do, but the 2 of us had always been close. My old man hadn't even waited till I was born to go grab some milk and cigarettes, and Grandma and Grandpa had helped my mom raise me so she could go to work. I have a lot of fond memories of sitting with my grandpa and watching TV, taking walks around the neighborhood, and eating ice cream at this little shop on the corner. He would always tell me to appreciate the little things, because the smallest thing could be the one that changes my life the most. "Take this," he would say, showing me the door knocker he often carried in his pocket. I found this when I was a very young man, sifting through trash in a landfill as I looked for bottles to sell. It became my lucky charm, and it changed my life forever. Grandpa carried that door knocker for as long as I had known him, and it was pretty unique. It was a brass hand holding an apple, and it was all meticulously crafted in exhausting detail. The fingers had individual nails, the apple had a stem and leaves, and even the knuckles had wrinkles on them had been carefully worked. I couldn't believe, as a young child, that Grandpa had just pulled this out of a dump, but he carried it everywhere, and I suppose it did bring him luck. The funeral was beautiful, everyone there having nothing but kind words for Grandpa and his family. After the service, my 3 cousins and I were asked to come to a will reading at the lawyer's office, and Grandpa had been as generous in death as he was in life. My cousins had received a trust fund for each of them, the amount payable on their 30th birthday, with a small living expense each month. Grandpa hadn't left a trust for me, but he had left me his little house, which I was pretty glad for. Mom had recently married, and, though I liked Mike a lot, it had seemed a little weird to have her adult son living in the house she was trying to make a new life in. Grandpa's old house was the perfect size for me, a college student with no real prospects of marriage in the near future. It was close enough to campus that I thought it would be ideal, but the lawyer had one more thing to give me. "Your grandfather was also very clear that I give you this," he said, handing me Grandpa's lucky charm, the brass door knocker. I thanked him, thinking I might hang it somewhere in the house, in Grandpa's memory. It seemed only fitting to make a little memorial wall out of it. After all, Grandpa had loved the thing, and it had been his only constant possession for years. So I moved in that day, taking my things, and wishing my mom and stepdad goodbye, as I, too, embarked on a new life. Over the next few days, I changed the house around a little. I hung my flat screen on the wall, I moved Grandpa's favorite chair around, I added my books to his bookshelf, and I donated his clothes and some of his other things to one of his favorite charities in town. I think Gramps would like the thought that his stuff would help people in need, and they were very thankful. A few of them offered condolences, having read about his death in the paper. Grandpa bought a lot of his stuff from Goodwill and Habitat for Humanity, but he also donated a lot, so he was well known to them. It was Friday, about 4 days after the funeral, when I noticed the knocker on the counter and remembered my plans to hang it and make a memorial wall. I didn't have anything else planned for that day, so it seemed like a fine pursuit. I hung the knocker in the living room, putting it above a little shelf where I put some candles and a picture of Granddad. I put his wallet up there too, something else he was never without, and I added a tin of Altoids, a pocket watch I had seen him wear, and a few other pictures of him. The door knocker was the centerpiece, and it all looked very nice when I got done. As I finished, I stepped back and admired it, thinking that Grandpa would have liked it too. That night was the first time I heard the knocking. I was lying in bed, doing some doom scrolling before I went to sleep, when suddenly, I heard a loud thump from the living room. I took out my earbud and listened, wondering if something had fallen over, or maybe someone was at the door, but I didn't hear anything. I shrugged, thinking it had been my imagination, but just before I could slip the earbud back in, I heard it again. 3 long booms from the living room, and then silence. I got up, wondering who would be knocking on my door at this time of night. I went to the front door and looked at the peephole. I opened the door to see if someone was joking around, but there was no one there. The front porch was empty, and Grandpa didn't have bushes or anything to hide behind. The kid, or whoever, would have to be the freaking Flash to make it off the porch without being seen. And I closed the door and started to go back to bed. I had come to the hallway that led there when I heard it again. 3 long booms, and then silence. I turned back, looking at the door, but there was nothing. The knocking hadn't come from the door, I would have been able to tell. No, it had come from the living room. I glanced around, looking for someone at a window, or maybe the rattle of a woodpecker on the eaves, but there was nothing. I decided to just go to bed and try to make sense of it later, but that wasn't the last time I heard it. I heard the knocking a couple of times over the weekend, but I could never quite nail down where it was coming from. It was always either 1, 2, or 3 knocks, followed by a 10-second pause, and then the same number of knocks before it stopped. By Monday, I was pulling my hair out, wondering if it was the pipes or something in the walls, and then finally I caught it. I had found a wedding picture of my grandparents sitting in a desk drawer, something Grandpa had probably put away so he wouldn't miss her, and decided it would look better on the shelf with his other memories. I was adding the wedding picture beside one of Gramps, accepting an award for philanthropy, when the knocker on the wall suddenly rattled and thumped. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, but it thumped once, twice, 3 times, and was quiet for about 10 seconds. I had just thought it might be a fluke or something when it did it again. Thump, thump, and then silence. I took it off the wall and looked for some kind of motor or something, but it was just a normal brass knocker. It happened 2 more times that day, and I was extremely curious as to what made it do it, and why. I started going through Grandpa's desk, hoping for some explanation, and that's when I found the letter. It was in the middle of a ledger book, addressed to me, and it wasn't even sealed, which was unlike Gramps. It was just a single page of notebook paper, and I was glad to see Grandpa's cramped handwriting speaking to me from the page. I hope you're enjoying the house, and I hope you found this letter in a timely manner. I had considered leaving it to Wilson to give to you, but I thought it might be better if you came across it naturally. Also, I wanted you to receive the knocker, and Wilson may have decided to keep it if he'd read the letter. He's a good man, an honest man, but greed can do funny things to people. You have probably noticed by now that the door knocker taps on its own sometimes. You wouldn't believe how I discovered its power, a complete accident, but I swear that what I'm about to tell you is absolutely true. The door knocker opens doors to different places. Place it on a door and wait for the knocks. Once it knocks, open the door and travel to where it takes you. The knocker only has 3 destinations, but they have been of great benefit to me and our family. When it knocks, you will have 10 seconds to open the door. The second set of knocks is the doorway closing, so it won't work if you catch it on the second set. 1 knock opens onto the treasury, a room of treasures, coins, gems, gold, all piled to the ceiling. If anything guards it, it has never bothered me, but I am always careful not to take too much. 2 knocks opens onto the library, a room stuffed with bookshelves. You can spend hours, days even, In this place and time won't pass outside the door. I have learned so many things here, things lost to time, and read about things that have yet to happen. 3 knocks opens onto a void, a darkness that I dare not enter. Anything you put in here will be gone. Anything. There is no ground inside it though, so don't walk in. I am ashamed to say that it's where I've been putting my trash, but it's also where I hid your dog, the one I said ran away when you were very young. He died suddenly, just lay over and died, and I put him in before you woke up from your nap. I'm sorry I never told you, but you were so young when it happened that I didn't think you would mourn him for long. The knocks are never consistent, but each knock seems to come at least once a day. The 3 knocks usually come in the evening or early afternoon. 1 knock is usually in the morning or before noon, and the 2 knocks comes when it will. While you are inside, don't let the door close. I was stuck in the library for a long time once, and was fortunate that your uncle came along and opened the door. Time doesn't affect people the same way inside the door as it does here, so spend as much time as you want there. If you get hurt, however, you will still be injured, so be careful. You and I have always been close, and I know you and your cousins have speculated for years about my mysterious fortune. The knocker is yours to do with what you will, but always remember that money breeds difficulty, which is why I have always kept it a secret. Good luck. I love you, kiddo. I read through the note a few times, trying to make sense of it. There was no way. Grandpa had always been sharp, not real problems mentally, but this sounded like the mad ramblings of a lunatic. The knocker, however, had moved on its own. That much was true. It occurred to me that there was a way to test the rest of it, so I decided to do just that. I took the knocker off the wall where I had hung it, and attached it to the closet door in the living room. It looked a little silly there, a door knocker on a door, that opened onto a closet, with 2 coats and a bunch of board games in it, but I wanted to be sure. It was silly, the kind of thing you read about in fairy tales, but I wanted to be sure. I had a while to wait, but it finally happened just as I was thinking of going to bed. It was around 10:30, and I was reaching for the remote to turn the TV off when I heard it. 2 loud knocks, seconds apart, on the closet door. I popped up, remembering I had 10 seconds to get there, and threw the door open. I expected to find the same closet that he had been there earlier. I expected this to be a joke from my grandfather. But I didn't expect to find the great library he had talked about on the other side. It was huge, a library to rival any I had ever seen, and the windows shone with perfect sunlight as I stood in shock. The shelves were tall, taller than the roof of the house I stood in, and they had long trestled ladders with wheels to slide along the floor. I could see a grand staircase, and I felt sure there would be levels above the next as well. I could learn anything in there. I could learn everything in there, but I remembered what Grandpa had said about not getting closed inside, and looked for something to prop the door open with. I saw an end table, and pulled it over to put in the way, stepping inside and marveling at the space. I spent hours perusing books. There were books on languages, on history, on science, on anything I would want to know. I only explored the first floor that night, but there was enough here to keep me reading for days, maybe months. I was studying architecture at college, and there was a whole section of books I could use to study any period, any style, and anything else I wanted. This place was like the library they talked about in Alexandria, the library in the Harry Potter books, and some kind of wizard's private collection from a fantasy novel, all rolled into one. Time may have moved differently here, but it didn't stop me from getting tired. I had been excited when I came in, but after a couple of hours of looking at books, I was yawning and rubbing my eyes. I decided to come back another time, and let the door close, as I pushed the end table out of the way. It was true. I couldn't believe it, but I had seen it myself. Grandpa had a magic door knocker. I spent the next few days testing each knock pattern, and Grandpa's observations had been spot on. I found the room with the gold in it the next day, and it was almost more impressive than the library. Think of a room full of any kind of money you could want. Gold bars, US currency, ancient denarii, little stones with things scratched on them, gems, pearls, silver nuggets, and other things I didn't have names for. I reached for a stack of hundreds with shaky hands, and brought them out before letting the door close again. I had made about $2,000 in a matter of seconds, and I put it somewhere safe before heading to class. The void was a little scarier when I got it, but I had been setting garbage bags beside the door, in case I was home when the knock came. The void was just what it claimed to be. It was like looking out at the night sky, except there were no stars. It was an inky, unnatural blackness, and I wondered if maybe Nietzsche had been describing this place when he talked about staring into the abyss. The space was utterly devoid of anything, but it seemed to crouch as well, just waiting for me to drop my guard. The bags went in, falling into a soundless, airless void, before I closed the door again. It was great for a while, truly a blessing. I had all the money I needed, and whatever I took seemed to come back after I shut the door. I could take books from the library if I needed to, and anything I left on the work tables would put itself back on the shelf. I spent a lot of time in the library when I could get there, and sometimes I would wake up to find I had fallen asleep. The door never slammed shut and trapped me in there, and without anyone to come behind me and accidentally close it, I felt safe in there. I learned so much in a relatively short time, and my professors were impressed with my knowledge. I considered bringing them the books I used to gain this knowledge, but thought better of it. How would I explain it to them? A guy in his early 20s, who just happened to have a book that was probably hundreds of years old, was something that would probably gain the attention of the wrong sort of people. I was careful not to use too much of the money, careful not to spread it around too much, and careful not to show anyone the books from the library. It went well for about 4 months, but then I started getting knocks of another sort from the door. It started subtly, with little knocks and taps from time to time. I'm sure I missed a lot of them, but I would sometimes look up if I was watching TV or something, expecting to see the knocker tapping, but find it silent. I started watching the door closer, seeing strange lights waft beneath it sometimes. They would skitter across the bottom, like strange shadows, and I found myself watching them more than the TV after a while. My trips to the other places were still uneventful, the landscapes the same as they had always been, but it was the times in between the knocks that I came to dread. Then, one night, something knocked back. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a familiar boom sound 3 times. I checked the clock and saw it was nearly 11, a little late for knocking, but I stuck my head out to look at the door, nonetheless. The toothbrush was still half in my mouth, and I had expected to see nothing stranger than the knocker fall back into place. Instead, something knocked again, and it wasn't the knocker. I came slowly out of the bathroom, watching as strange lights came flashing from between the cracks in the door. It was like a haunted house attraction, and I almost expected to see smoke billowing out from underneath it. The knocks were shy, almost uncertain, and I was preparing to head to my room when something hit the door hard enough to shake it in the frame. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, and when it hit it again, I fell onto my butt and just watched it shake. Whatever was knocking was adamant about getting in, and it slammed its weight into the door, again and again. The knob rattled, the door shook, and the lights flashed faster and angrier. My teeth were chattering. This had never happened before, and I was terrified that whatever it was might get through. It slammed into it again, the old wooden door cracking in the frame, and when it struck this time, I saw something break through the surface and come grabbing blindly from within. It was an arm, a long purple arm covered in scales. It thrashed around, trying to find something to grab, and the sounds from within were like bats and birds turned up to 1,000. It shivered right on the edge of hearing, and I expected my ears to start bleeding. It was looking for the knob, and I wasn't sure what would happen if it found it. Instead, it bumped into the knocker. It fell off the door. It was only held on by a couple of screws, and as it clattered onto the floor, the most hellish sound of all ripped from the hole before being cut off as suddenly as it had begun. The lights, the noise, and the banging all stopped with a suddenness that made me dizzy. I stood up, looking at the broken door, and walked slowly into the living room to see the extent of the damage. Something was bumping, but I thought maybe the arm had knocked something over. I wanted to make sure the knocker was okay, but as I came around Grandpa's old chair, I saw what was making all the noise. It was the arm that had come through the door. It was leaking black fluid all over the hardwood and flopping around like a fish. It didn't flop for long, but now I'm left with a problem. The portal only seems to open when the knocker is up, but unless it's up, I can't open it. I wonder if this is why my grandpa kept it with him so often. Did he, perhaps, have a visitor one night when he least expected it? For now, I'm keeping the knocker in my bedside table, but even as I lay here writing this, I can hear it bump against the wood every now and again. The money will eventually run out. That, or my curiosity to learn, will get the better of me, and I'll hang the knocker again. But I think, for now, I'll let it sit. No need to invite trouble if I don't have to. My inheritance had some strange rules. Story 3. I woke up to strange fog surrounding our house. I woke up to fog. Fog is pretty common in our area. We live in a little valley, and the fog just sort of pools here, especially in the early morning. But this fog, this was different. For one, it was incredibly thick. When I let Tucker, our dog, out for his morning bathroom break, he sprinted into the backyard and completely disappeared. Tucker, our backyard is big, but not that big. I could hear him pawing around in the grass, but I couldn't see him more the far side of the fence. Of course, my kids loved it. Cool, Adrian yelled. It's like we're living in a cloud, Emma said. I was less thrilled. I could hear the cars roaring by on the main road, less than 30 feet from our front door, but I couldn't see them. And, probably, they couldn't see us. That's a lot of fog. Really dangerous to be driving right now, I said. Reminds me of that time up in Maine, my wife started. Ah yes, the Maine fog story I'd heard 100 times. That's what marriage is, basically. Repeating the same stories to each other until one of you dies. It was like pea soup, and I pulled back the curtain and peered out the window. Okay, I could see the wind spinners 10 feet from the door, and the outline of our row of privacy shrubs, and maybe, if I squinted, I could see the soft outline of the cars passing. But nothing beyond that. Wham! I crashed into a tree. Well, it was a tiny one, little more than a sapling, really. I turned around. The kids were crowded around the sliding glass door with Tucker, watching the fog. They were ready to just jump out there. I wasn't sure I liked that, and even the tow truck couldn't find me. Mary broke into laughter. She always did at the end of the story. I forced a laugh, too, pretending I was listening. Daddy, can we go outside? Emma asked, tugging at my hand. I don't know. Please. Fine. Okay. As soon as I opened the door, they rocketed outside and disappeared. Sighing, I ran out after them, blindly maneuvering through the white. Wait, where were they? I stood in the backyard. Thick fog surrounded me. I couldn't see the back door anymore. I spun around, squinting at the hazy outlines of the picket fence, trying to orient myself. Adrian, Emma. We're over here, came Emma's voice, somewhere to my left. I breathed out a sigh of relief and stepped to the left. And there it was, right there Emma's and Adrian's playhouse. Weird, I'd been picturing myself more to the right, where Mary used to grow roses a few years ago. This is a house on top of a giant cloud, Emma proclaimed. This is a flying scooter, Adrian yelled, making whooshing noises as he pushed the scooter through the mud. I sat on the damp grass, watching them closely as they played. 2 hours later, the fog was as thick as ever. Usually in this area, the fog slowly dissipates as the sun rises, but not this time. At 9 a.m., the fog was still a thick white blanket, obscuring everything that was more than 20 feet away. And that's when I realized something else. Our backyard faces a row of other backyards. The one 3 houses to the left has this pair of yappy little white dogs. Don't ask me what kind. They all look the same to me, yapping away at this or that constantly. This morning they were completely silent. I guess everyone's inside. Then I frowned. Maybe they're inside for a reason. Maybe they know something I don't. I quickly pulled out my phone and shot a text off to a few of our neighbors. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No one replied. Did a few Google searches with our town name and fog, mist, weather. Nothing about it online. I sat in the grass, watching Emma and Adrian play inside, idly twirling the phone between my fingers. Mary appeared out of the fog, her silhouette slowly darkening as she stepped towards us. You want to take your morning run? I can watch the kids. Ah, no, it's too foggy. She quirked an eyebrow at me. I thought you committed to exercising every day. Yeah, but these are extenuating circumstances. Fog. I could see rain, or snow. But fog, damn it. I'd made Mary my accountability partner in getting fit. After chasing the kids for more than 10 minutes would leave me panting for air. And she was not easy on me. Fine, I grumbled. She smiled smugly. I went inside and put on my workout clothes, then left. The fog was just as bad in the front yard as it was in the backyard. I crossed the driveway, then stopped. Usually, when there was such thick fog like this, our cars would be covered in a thin coating of glistening mist. But today, they looked dry as a bone. Weird. I turned down the sidewalk and continued down, away from the main road. My pounding footsteps were loud in the silence. Houses loomed through the fog like colossal monsters, slowly fading into view. Then I heard whistling, a clear melody cutting through the fog. It took me 10 more paces until I saw the sore-souled Mr. Frank Cambry out working on his yard. Hey, Jared, he called as he saw me. I slowed to a stop. Hey, what's up with this fog, huh? Oh, I don't know, he shrugged, then brought the pruning shear back up to the shrub. Snip, we've always got fog. Frank was constantly working on his lawn. It was the pride of his home. Some men liked their cars, or computers, or a man cave in the basement. This guy loved his lawn. His bushes were always pruned, his grass always a vivid shade of green, even in the fall, but still. Working on the lawn in extreme fog, a little weird, even for him. Then again, I was the one jogging in it. It usually lets up by now, doesn't it? It's almost 10 a.m. He didn't take his eyes off the shrubs. Snip, snip. I don't know about that, he said, non-committally. And it's really thick fog, like thicker than usual. You don't think it's weird? Nope. Then he started whistling again, as if to signal the conversation was over. Kind of rude, I thought, glancing at him. Then I continued running, down the sidewalk, taking my usual loop around the neighborhood. The houses passed by me, all dark, all quiet. I was about 10 houses down when the whistling stopped. It didn't slowly fade away, like I'd expect it to, as I walked out of range. And it didn't cut off abruptly either, as if Frank had decided to stop whistling. No, it had quickly faded into silence, like someone turning the dial down on a radio. Huh, that's kind of strange. But I continued running down the sidewalk, thinking nothing of it. It was so surreal. The houses across the street were blurred and washed out, gray silhouettes with no detail. Several feet in front of me, the sidewalk faded into white nothingness. Where the sidewalk ends, maybe in seconds, I'd be careening off the edge of the world, into a void of nothingness. What a happy thought. As I got close to home, the sharp barks of 2 yapping dogs jolted me from my thoughts. Ah, finally, my old yappy pals. I kept running, my legs aching, lungs burning, and then I froze. Just like the whistling, the barking stopped. A quick fade out, like someone turning down the dial of a radio. My heart sank. There is something really weird about this fog. Its muffling sound. What the fuck is going on here? And I thought of Mr. Cambry. His rudeness about it all. Does he know something I don't? I sprinted back to the house. Ran out into the backyard. Pulled Mary aside. There's something really weird going on. Let's get the kids inside. But they're having so much fun. Yeah, well. I opened the playhouse door, reached my hand inside, and grabbed Emma's arm. Come on, I said, pulling her gently. We need to get inside. No, I don't want to. Too bad. We need to. I stopped. Emma, where's Adrian? I don't know. Mary, where's Adrian? I thought he was in the playhouse with Emma. Well, he's not. He's got to be in the backyard, Mary said, plainly. That's why we have the fence. He knows how to open the gate. You know that. How could she be so calm, Adrian? Adrian, where are you? I shouted. My heart dropped as I whirled around, searching for any trace of him. A muddy trail from scooter wheels. Footprints, a little silhouette. But there was nothing on the fog. Adrian was only 4. He didn't have the sense that Emma had. The sense not to talk to strangers, or walk into the road. Oh my God, the road. Cars roaring by, in thick fog, that wouldn't see him until it was too late. I ran blindly through the white, up the side yard. The gray silhouette of the gate slowly faded into view. No, it was open. Adrian, I screamed. Adrian, where are you? Come back here, right now. Oh God, the fog made this impossible. He could be running into the road right now, and I wouldn't know. Adrian, I screamed, running wildly. And then just like the whistling, a sound faded into my ears. Thump, thump. My heart dropped. Adrian, I screamed, running towards the sound. The silhouette slowly came into view. Adrian, at the far end of our front yard, standing in the corner between the side of the house and the picket fence, slowly bashing his head into the fence. Thump, thump. Adrian, he took a step, smacked his head into the wooden fence. Thump. Feet slid back in the mud. Took another step. Thump. Adrian. I grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him away. Why? Why are you doing that? He looked at me blankly. There was a swollen lump on his forehead, already darkening with a bruise. Adrian, he broke eye contact. I don't know, he muttered to the ground. Were you trying to hurt yourself? No, I was. Trying to get back to you, and Emma, and Mommy. His lip quivered. Then he threw his arms around me and squeezed, holding on tight. But I got lost. Got lost. In the fog, I glanced around. The fog was bad, but clearly he could see the fence a few feet in front of him. Him repeatedly smacking into it was deliberate. It's okay, Adrian. It's okay. Do you want to go inside and get some chocolate milk? He nodded. I walked him back inside, holding his hand tightly, reassuring him that everything was okay, that it was all better now. But everything was definitely not okay. The fog was still there when the sun set. The 4 of us sat around the dinner table, eating quietly. Not much to say. Emma was still sulking about outside playtime being cut short, and Adrian just looked around with a listless, empty gaze. My wife attempted to fill the void with rambling conversation a few times, but it never picked up. Thump, thump. That horrible sound repeated in my head, over and over again. Adrian was a wacky kid, and he didn't always look out for his safety. He was fond of doing risky things, like jumping off the sofa, spinning in the office chair, climbing on things. But I'd never seen him intentionally hurt himself. Thump, 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 and the dazed look in his eyes when I'd stopped him. It was like I'd woken him from a trance. He was trying to get back to us, and he'd gotten lost in the fog. So he decided to pound his head against the fence, over and over. I shuddered and pushed my plate of pasta away. "You're done?" Mary asked. "Yeah, I think so." "Wow, nobody feels like eating tonight, huh? Can I go play with my dolls?" Emma asked. "I want to go," too, Adrian added. "5 more bites. Both of you," Mary said, pointing her fork accusingly. Then they ran off, and it was just the two of us, clearing dishes from the table. "Everything okay?" she asked, plunging Emma's frozen dish under the faucet. "Yeah, just shook up from the whole Adrian thing earlier." "Sure." She grabbed the sponge. "That kind of behavior is common though, Jared. Some kids bite themselves or bang their heads to cope with emotions or get attention. He's only 4. He's still got a lot to figure out." "Yeah, I guess." That was another thing that bothered me. Mary seemed so calm about everything. About the fog, about losing Adrian, about him banging his head. Years ago, she'd been the other way, worrying about everything. When she was pregnant with Adrian, we'd gotten news that something looked wrong on the ultrasound. In the end, everything was fine, but for the few weeks we didn't know, Mary was an absolute wreck. And now, she didn't care. I grabbed Adrian's dish and hit it against the side of the trash can. Fat rigatoni pasta slid off and fell into the garbage with a goopy splat. I slid the plate onto the counter and turned around. I froze. Emma's frozen dish was lying shattered on the floor. Elsa's face split right in two. And next to it, lying on the kitchen floor, was Mary. One arm splayed out, the other tucked across her chest. Dark liquid seeping into her pink dress, dripping down from her face. Her eyes wide, blank, unseeing. "Mary, oh my God, Mary." I dropped to my knees, reached for her shoulder. "Mary, what happened? What, Jared?" I whipped around. Mary was standing behind me, holding the frozen dish. "Are you okay?" she asked, extending a hand to help me up off the floor. I looked down. There was nothing in front of me. My hand was touching empty tile. I'm fine," I stuttered. I grabbed the next plate off the stack and plunged it under the sink, my hands trembling. What the fuck just happened? Did I just hallucinate? My wife being dead, I glanced out the window. The fog blanketed the entire backyard, thick and heavy. I could barely see 5 feet into the backyard. I shuddered, and then something clicked. "Mary, do you think the fog isn't really fog?" She looked up at me. "What do you mean? Could it be some sort of smoke? Or spillover from the power plant? Or some sort of gas?" My voice was hurried now, frantic. "Something that messes with our minds. A drug." She gave me a weird look. No. I think it's fog." She reached over and shut the sink off, then slid her plate in the drying rack. But, Adrian's acting so odd, and I hesitated, then decided not to mention what I'd just seen. "Well, I'm not feeling so great either. It's just fog. You're worrying about nothing." She smiled at me, then walked out of the room. I stared out the window. The fog hung in the air, thick as ever. I sat in the rocking chair. Emma was on the floor, drawing pictures with Adrian. Mary's head rested on my shoulder as she read some thriller. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. There's a reason why I didn't tell her about Eat a Good One. A few years ago, I don't even remember exactly when it was. Now Mary and I weren't in a good place. I'd lost my job, been unemployed for several months, and was turning to alcohol. Some nights, I'd just drink myself silly in the study all night. Usually, nothing came of it. The worst I'd do is piss myself and fall asleep. Embarrassing, sure, but nothing more. But there was that one night. The kids were at her parents' for the weekend. I decided to stay home drinking instead of going with her to a friend's dinner party. She came home late, like 1 a.m. Later than just a dinner party should go. She'd lost the cardigan, too, revealing her strapless dress. By that time, I was the worst sort of drunk. Drunk enough to let my temper get the better of me, but not drunk enough to be sloppy and incoherent. I accused her. "You were with Brendan, weren't you?" "Jared, you're being ridiculous. We'll talk in the morning. Don't lie to me. I'm not. You're drunk and acting out. Leave me alone." She walked towards the kitchen. I followed her and got a whiff of what I thought was cologne in my altered state. For God's sake, I can smell him on you. Jared, stop it. And then I said them. Those 4 little words that shattered our marriage in an instant. I'll fucking kill you. My lowest moment. Drunk, depressed, and threatening the person I love the most. I would give anything to go back in time and take it back. Believe me, in every moment of my life since then has been me working to correct it. But it still bothers her. Sometimes when we have a bad fight, she brings it up and starts to cry. Sometimes, when I move quickly or unexpectedly towards her, she flinches a little. A lot of marriages have a stain like that, an awful moment, a betrayal, a break of trust, and no matter how hard you try to wash it away, the stain is always there. So no, I wasn't going to tell her that I'd hallucinated her being dead. I rocked slowly in the chair. It squeaked under my weight. Emma giggled, and Adrian colored furiously, his crayon scratching against the page. Mary linked her arm with mine, smiling up at me. Fog. It had to be some sort of chemical, messing with our minds, making us hurt ourselves like Adrian, making us hallucinate. Because I've been a drunk, I've had mental health issues, and I've been a total fucking mess. But I've never hallucinated anything in my life. I glanced out the window. The fog hung thick and heavy in the air, obscuring everything more than a few feet past our windows. We were like an island, just the 4 of us here, in a house, disconnected from everyone and everything, among a sea of roiling fog, alone. I sat on Emma's bed. Adrian had already fallen asleep, but Emma needed her quota of bedtime stories before she would even think about sleep. "Can we read the Frozen one, Daddy?" she asked. "You always ask for that one. It's my favorite." Then she lowered her voice to a whisper. "Daddy, is Adrian okay? Damn it." I'd tried to be so quiet when I talked to Mary about it, but Emma must have heard. "I swear, sometimes I think this kid has supernatural hearing." "Yeah, he's going to be okay," I whispered back. I smiled at her, tucked a blonde curl behind her ear. "I promise." And then I started the story, because I didn't want to answer any more awkward questions. Of course, she had more for me. "Why is it so foggy?" "I don't know. The weather, I guess. It's weird, I know. Can I play outside tomorrow? Even if it's still foggy?" I paused. "I don't know." "Okay." She squeezed my hand. "Will you get Mr. Snuggles for me?" "Sure, sweetheart. Where is he?" "In the playhouse." I hesitated. "He's in the playhouse, outside." "Yes." I glanced out the window. The fog was still there, diffusing the moonlight, making the night look lighter than it actually was. The street lamp in front of our house floated among the silhouettes of leafless trees, surrounded by a wide halo. Strangely, I couldn't see any of the other street lamps even, though they were only several feet away. "I'll get him for you tomorrow, but I can't fall asleep without him." "Why did you bring him in the playhouse?" "We were having a tea party." I frowned, sighed, hemmed and hawed. "Please." Okay. I'll be right back." I went out of her room and walked down the stairs. Then I was standing at the sliding glass door, staring outside. The fence extended on either side of the backyard, disappearing completely into the white. The grass, too, just faded away. Like our backyard didn't even exist. No sign of the playhouse. Tucker lifted his head sleepily from the dog bed, staring at me. Am I really doing this? Oh, my head was pounding, and I was so tired. But I had to do it, for Emma. Enduring her resisting sleep for an hour, or crying would be way worse. I opened the door. Outside, it was silent. Not quiet, absolutely silent. No rattling of branches. No quiet murmurs from the houses next door. The air was cool against my skin, but it didn't have that heavy feeling of humidity. Which was weird, considering the air was probably mostly water vapor at this point. I continued blindly into the fog. After a minute, I found the fence. Okay, good. I can use this. I walked forward, one hand trailing along the edge, and then I saw it. The peaked roof, the faux shingles, the little cutout windows. I crouched down next to it, pushed the little door open. The hinges creaked. I ducked my head, turned on my phone's flashlight, and peeked inside. A soccer ball, a plastic pot, a toy car, lots of dirt and dried leaves, and Mr. Snuggles sitting next to a dirty teacup. Ugh. I contorted and grabbed the stuffed animal. Then I got up, stretching to my full height, and looked around. Which way is the house? I wasn't even sure. I took a step away from the playhouse, then two. I couldn't see a damned thing. I took a deep breath, breathing in the weirdly non-humid fog, and searched for the fence. Ah, there. So just walk parallel to it. My foot snagged on a root. I tumbled forward. My arms flailed out in front of me. I was at the tree further from our house. Look at you, lost in your own backyard, I muttered to myself. And then I stopped. There was a small hole in the tree, right under the branches. The kind of hole that birds might build a nest in. An irregular shape, with the bark hanging over it and a point at the top. I'd noticed it a few times, when hanging our bird feeder or playing outside with the kids. But here on the ground, I saw that there was another hole, right at the bottom of the tree. It was the exact same shape. I pulled myself up, looked at the hole near the branches, then down at the hole at the base. There was no mistaking it, they were the exact same hole. What the fuck? I whispered. I paced around the tree, examining it closely. And then I saw it. A third hole, right in the middle of the tree. The exact same shape. I didn't know what to do. So I turned around and began to run. Towards where I thought the house was, but I couldn't be sure. Everything was a sea of white. I couldn't see the playhouse, or the fence. I was running blindly. Then I saw the light, our floodlight, dimly shining through the fog. I clawed my way up and stumbled through the grass, onto the patio. I grabbed the glass door, wrenched it open, and stumbled into the kitchen. Turned on the faucet, splashed water on my face. Are you okay? Mary's voice, from behind me. Yeah, I got lost out there. Kinda scary, I said, turning towards her. But I got Mr. Snuggles, and that's what my breath caught in my throat. Blood, all over her fucking face. Trickling over her left eye, and down her cheek, as if she were crying blood. Dripping down her chin, and onto the floor. Tap, tap, tap. I could hear it hitting the tile, rhythmically. Tap, tap, tap. And on her forehead, a horrible wound. Like someone had bashed in her skull with a hammer. Oh my God, Mary, what? And then it was gone. Just like that, snap, it was gone. And she was staring at me, with her large eyes and pretty little mouth, looking at me with concern. I let out a shuddering breath. Never mind, I'm going upstairs. Emma's waiting for me. Asterisk, 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 I woke up at 6 a.m. the next day. I ran over to the curtains, hoping to see the road. The sidewalk, our neighbors across the street. But when I pulled them back, all I saw was fog. Mary groaned sleepily. What time is it? A little after 6. Okay, I stared out the window. The fog was slowly lightening from deep gray to a haunting blue, pierced only by that one street lamp. Our front lawn was quickly subsumed by the fog, falling off only several feet from the front door. I walked back to the bed. I think we should do something. This isn't normal. I turned to her, squeezing her hand. You're right, she started. I think we should. And then she just stopped. No, she didn't just stop, like she lost her train of thought. Her entire face was frozen. Her body was still. Her hand was limp in mine. Mary, Mary, I shouted, grabbing her, shaking her, looking into her eyes. But they were totally blank. Empty, lifeless. Like I was looking at a doll instead of a person. Mary, she jolted into motion. Call dash some dash neighbors dash and dash see dash what dash they dash think. She said the words fast, slurring them like she was drunk. Then she just sat there, smiling at me, like nothing was wrong. Mary, oh my God, are you okay? Of course I'm okay, she said brightly. No, you're just, I faltered, trying to pick out the words. You froze up. It was awful. I thought maybe you were having a seizure. Or, Jared, what are you talking about? What you just did. I didn't do anything. What? You're saying you forget what happened 30 seconds ago? Jared, please. You're acting crazy. No, I'm not. The rest of you are acting fucking crazy. I stood up, backing away. Adrian, smashing his head against the fence. You getting all paralyzed for a second, and me. I've been seeing things, Mary. I didn't want to tell you. There's something in this fog. Maybe the fog itself is something. A chemical messing with our heads. But you think I'm crazy, don't you? She averted her eyes, and that gave me the answer I needed. I went into the bathroom and slammed the door. Splashed water on my face. Then I just stared at myself in the mirror. And something clicked. What just happened to Mary conjured up a clear memory. A memory of playing Skyrim for the first time on my old laptop with the terrible RAM. An hour into play, the main character freezing up, and then suddenly shouting out the words at double speed. That's exactly what Mary did, just now. I watched the water drip off my face, heard them plummet into the sink. Tap, tap, tap. But I just stood there, my hands growing numb against the cold counter. Could it be? Another memory flashed through my mind. A memory of playing Minecraft with Emma. Daddy, she said. I don't want the computer to keep freezing up. You're flying too high, that's why. The computer can't keep up, rendering all those mountains and valleys in the distance. Can you fix it? Sure. I went into the settings, changed the render distance so that the computer would only show the landscape within 50 blocks of the player. And that's when the game took on the appearance of thick fog. No, it can't be, but the memories were coming faster now. The bark on the tree, with that same damned hole. Like a repeating texture had been plastered all over it. Adrian smashing his head into the fence. Like an NPC that had gotten stuck in a corner. Mary repeating the same story about the main fog. What if they weren't people? What if they were just sets of code? Daddy, where are you? Emma's voice coming through the door. I backed away, tears burned my eyes, and I turned away trying to hide it. Jared, are you okay in there? Tell her to go away, please. My voice trembled. Jared. When I didn't reply, I heard her muffled tones, then the scattered footfalls of Emma, skipping away. I pushed the door open. Mary sat on the bed, eyes locked with mine. She offered me a small, sympathetic smile. Mary, yes. I opened my mouth, struggling to say the words, to get the confirmation I needed. I didn't want it to be true, but I had to know. I had to. It's so foggy out, I whispered. She paused, blinked, and then she started. It's like that one time in Maine. It was so foggy. I know. I opened my mouth, fighting back the urge to cry. Jared, what do you even love me? I stepped towards her. Do you even know who I am? Of course, I love you, Jared. You're only saying that because that's what you're programmed to say. Damn it, don't you understand? You're not real. None of this is. She stared at me, and then her face began to change. Her flesh flickered, like a malfunctioning TV. Then it rippled, as if made of putty. She slowly stood, took a step and then she was right in front of me. Blood dripped down her face. Her neck hung strangely to one side. Her arms were stiff, hanging limply at her sides. And she wore that pink dress, the one she was wearing on the kitchen floor, the one she wore when she went out with her friends that awful night. Jared, I turned and ran, down the hallway, into Emma's room. I crouched down next to her, brushing her face, tears running down my cheeks. Emma, please. Her eyes snapped open, and then her face rippled, just like Mary's had. No. I backed away. My foot hit something solid, and I whipped around. Adrian, he stood behind me, totally stiff, hazel eyes staring blankly into mine. No, please. I started down the stairs. The tile floor rose up below me, freezing into a pixelated mess. The stairs began to stretch and buckle. I lost my balance and pitched forward. Then there was only darkness. Asterisk, my eyes snapped open. I was sitting alone in a small room. 3 white walls, the 4th floor 2 ceiling, darkened glass. In front of me stood a desk. A computer sat on it, the screen black. Several wires trailed up from the ports, leading up from my head. What? I heard whispers, coming from somewhere. Thought I heard the words, "He's awake," coming from the other side of the glass. Saw shadows shifting and moving, too dark to make out well. Jared Donahue, a voice said, through unseen speakers. Do you remember why you're here? Emma, Adrian, Mary. Their faces swirled in my head, foggy and distant. Sharp pain throbbed through my head. I glanced at the computer, then the desk, then my hands. My hands attached to the table with handcuffs. Pain jolted through my skull. The fantasy suddenly evaporated, and the memories came rushing back, all of them. Tears burned at my eyes, and I began to cry. You remember, don't you? The unseen voice said. I'll fucking kill you, I'd said to Mary, on the worst night of my life. But it didn't end there. The memory of what really happened played in my mind, as vivid and horrible as if I were doing it all over again. After saying that, I charged into the garage, grabbed the hammer on the work table. I found Mary in the kitchen, facing the sink, eating some crackers on Emma's Elsa plate. She whipped around, eyes widening, but it was too late. I brought it down on her head. The plate shattered. The body fell. Blood everywhere. My entire world gone. Jared Donahue, we're killing your wife. Mary, you have received the life penalty, a voice said through the speakers. You will continue to see the life you could have had on our computers. And then every day, when we unplug, You must come to terms with what you've done. All over again. I stared out into the darkened glass. I could barely make out the faces, but among the crowd, I thought I saw two teenagers standing together. A boy with hazel eyes and a girl with curly blonde hair. Emma, Adrian, I whispered. They didn't acknowledge me. They just stared, eyes burning with hate as they looked at their mother's killer. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I stood in front of the window, staring out at the fog that had rolled in overnight. Emma pressed her face to the glass, and Adrian was whispering "ooh" over and over again. Such sweet kids. That's a lot of fog out there, I said, as I took a sip of coffee. Mary looked up at me and smiled. Yeah, reminds me of that one time up in Maine. Ah, yes. The Maine fog story I'd heard 100 times. That's what marriage is, basically. Repeating the same stories to each other until one of you dies. I sat down, took another sip of coffee, and listened. Story for it eats them all. Lots of people collect things. My Aunt Vivian used to joke that she collected people. She'd always done it since I could remember rolling along next to me as we went on one of our outings. She would always have a Polaroid camera dangling from a strap around her neck, like a 90s kid's idea of an old-fashioned reporter. Not that I thought about it back then. She'd always had it, and she didn't use it all the time, just when she ran across certain people. I asked her once what made her decide who to take pictures of, and at first, she just gave me her beautiful, mysterious smile. She was 20 years older than me, but she looked much younger when she smiled like that. Laughing, she held up the camera like she was going to take my picture. I just look for those people that are extra shiny to me. She lowered it again, without snapping, as her smile faded a little. Why don't you take a picture of me then? Aren't I shiny? I had injected a bit of fake hurt into my voice. At least I thought it was fake. Gripping the wheels of her chair, she turned and started heading across the food court, where we'd just eaten lunch. You're plenty shiny, sure, but I already have you, don't I? Running to catch up with her, I put my hands gently on the chair's handles without really adding any push. Sure, Viv, sure. She glanced back at me with a grin. That's what I thought. She had hundreds of photos, all organized in albums by some organizational scheme that I didn't understand. Maybe it was alphabetical after all. She never took someone's photo without asking permission and getting their name. A few times when I was really young that I'd suggested someone or something for her to take a picture of, she'd almost always politely refused. No pictures of squirrels or dogs or trees, and no pictures of people unless they met Vivian's shiny criteria and they agreed to be taken. Stacks and stacks of albums of strangers, some shy or awkward or even annoyed, though many were smiling, happy to oblige the pretty woman in the wheelchair that thought they were worthy of her time and film. When I was in high school, they filled a bookshelf, and by the time I graduated college, she'd devoted a walk-in closet to 4 larger shelves, all low enough that she could reach every book easily. That ease of use was a necessity, though I didn't figure that out until I was a bit older. I lived a few hours away by that point, and while I still saw Aunt Viv at most big holidays and birthdays, I couldn't deny that she felt more remote now. Growing up, we'd spent whole weeks together, just the two of us, and I missed that closeness, that friendship. Maybe that's why I went to see her on the spur of the moment, thinking it would be nice to get away from my graduate work, and a good surprise to visit her without a particular reason. I had to ring her doorbell several times before I got an answer, and when I did, I let out a small, involuntary gasp before putting my bag down and crouching next to Vivian. What, are you sick? She gave me a wan smile that seemed to painfully stretch her dry, cracked lips. Those lips were too pale, but everything about her seemed pale and fragile in that moment. Everything but her eyes, that still danced with the same bright life and intelligence behind heavy, bruised-looking eyelids. A little, maybe overtired. Mainly, been working on a project I do every few months. And it's just, well, it's taken more out of me this time than usual. Standing up, I grabbed my bag and walked in at her waving invitation. Do you need to go to a doctor or something? She laughed, but it was strained and thin. No, nothing like that. I'll be right as rain soon enough. I'd never known Viv to lie to me, but I didn't believe her then. Something was really wrong, and she was too stubborn or private to tell me about it. That was her right, of course, but that fact didn't help me worry less. Giving her a smile I didn't feel, I nodded. Okay, if you say so. But at least let me help with whatever you're doing, okay? Just tell me what to do, and I can do it while you rest. It felt like she considered my offer for a very long time. It was probably less than 10 seconds, but things seemed to stretch out forever as I waited awkwardly for her to reject my help. Okay, I can trust you with it. Follow me. Her expression didn't change during this just closed and neutral as she wheeled off toward the back of the house with me close behind. I wasn't surprised when she led me to her picture closet, but then I saw the interior of the room. There were twice as many shelves now, and while some were empty, the filled space had clearly been growing at an increasing rate. On the far end of the middle shelves, I noticed a small stack of albums that were on a short table there. What was she doing with them? As if reading my thoughts, she answered right away, pruning. I only keep photos of people while they're alive. It's a custom I have. When I first started, I'd have to rely on newspapers and various paid services to find out when someone in my books passed. But since the internet got big, it's much easier. Vivian chuckled. Still time-consuming, of course. It takes way more time as I collect more people. And the longer I do it, the more likely that people will die. She shrugged. Still, it must be done. I stared at her. Why? Why did it need to be done? It sounded boring and tedious, and what difference did it make? I wanted to ask her, but I held my tongue. For all her energy and interests, I knew that Vivian often had a hard and lonely life. So what if she wanted to have odd hobbies and attach weird rituals to them? Did it hurt? And if it helped her, wasn't it worth it? So what can I do? Take out pictures of dead people? She grinned at me. No, I can do that part. You can do the research. I spent the next 2 days pruning with Vivi. Think we removed over 300 people from over 4,000 in the books. Though at some point, I lost count. When I left the next day, I wouldn't say that Vivian looked like her old self, but she did seem more rested and relaxed. She also made me promise to visit more often, and when I said I would, I meant it. Over the next 2 years, I did visit more, and other than a joking comment here or there, I never really brought up how quickly her collection was growing. You might think she'd start running out of people in the area she lived, but she almost never took pictures there. Instead, she traveled all over West Coast, East Coast, big cities and little towns no one has ever heard of. Looking up their obituaries and death certificates, I could have quickly accrued my own collection covering every state in the country. I asked her once why she never traveled abroad for any pictures, and she just smirked at me. Harder to get death information, Ufada country. I paused at that, weighing whether it was a joke or serious. When her smirk broke into a grin, I returned it, going back to looking up if Ruby Holzek was still in the land of the living. There was the name, and checking it against the picture. Yeah, it looked like she died 6 months earlier in a car accident. During these years, I didn't really see my other family that often. Christmas, maybe, or when someone was very sick. My time was taken up by school, primarily, and when I had free time for family, I usually spent it with Viv. Seeing her more often made it harder for me to notice her decline harder, but not impossible. I wanted to ask her what was going on, and if she was going to be okay. Because for all the time I'd spent with her, I'd never fully understood what put her in that chair, or kept her there. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to ask her directly, worried that she'd get mad, or depressed, or suddenly think I saw her as less of a person than a problem, or the disease that put her in that position. So instead, I went home and asked my mother. For her part, she looked startled. She even paled a bit. Why are you asking about this? I shrugged. I've just been hanging out with Aunt Viv some, and I worry about her. She's getting worse, weaker. Lighting a cigarette, my mother nodded. You always were close with her, closer than I ever was. She was younger than me and your Uncle Andy. Not by a lot, but enough. Enough that she was the baby, and we didn't really want her around. She fluttered her hand dismissively. Not that we didn't love her, we did. But to a couple of older kids, she was just a pain, and when she got older, she started getting sick. Everyone knows she was going to die. My eyes widened. Is that when she went into the wheelchair? She shook her head. Not yet. That didn't happen until she was a teenager. This thing she has. I don't remember what they call it, but it burns you out fast. It starts with headaches and falling down more. Then one day maybe your feet are numb, or your legs don't work good anymore. Before long, you're in a chair, then a bed, then you're gone. She glanced up at me with a guarded look. At least that's what they told us. It's strange, hearing that your sister has a short shelf life, like she's a jug of milk or something. Me and Andy figured she'd be gone within a year or two, and we felt guilty for not hurting more at the idea of losing her. Again, it wasn't that we didn't love her. It was more like we couldn't really see the real her past, all the responsibility and expense and hassle, all the attention she got, and how everything revolved around her. And so, knowing that she was going to die soon, we really did feel sad about it. Terribly sad. But there was some relief there too. Jesus, I just stared at her, not sure what to say. My mother shrugged as she took another drag on the cigarette. I know how it sounds. I do. But we were kids. And besides, she wound up living after all. Trying to keep my voice even, I asked a question that had been fluttering around in my head the past few minutes. How did she live, if she was supposed to die so quick? Was she misdiagnosed? My mother shook her head. No one ever said it was a wrong diagnosis. It was just chalked up to a miracle. You're too young to remember this, but your grandmother used to call her Miracle Baby, sometimes even after she was grown. And she did it all the time when we were young. It was annoying, but I got it. It really did seem like something magical had happened. She went from looking worse on a weekly basis to being stronger and healthier again. For a while, you couldn't even tell anything was wrong with her. Then she started slipping and falling again. Not long after, she had to go into a chair. Again, we thought she was going to die soon, but no. After a few weeks, she was looking better, stronger and healthier. She never got her legs back, but you couldn't even tell it bothered her most of the time. She'd just roll around, snapping pictures with those cameras of hers, happy and popular and full of life. She paused and shot me a look. She's still doing that thing with taking pictures. I nodded silently. My mother snorted. Figures. She was always a weird girl. I love her, but weird as hell. After that, I noticed the ebbs and flows in Vivian Morchet would slowly decline, and then she'd spring back, though I realize now that her high point was always slightly lower than the time before, and the catalyst for the improvement, it was always the same pruning out the dead people from her collection. I think I'd noticed that from the start, but I always told myself that it was a coincidence, or my imagination, or that the ritual itself or the company I provided were just giving her a temporary boost. But as I watched her dip lower and lower, only to come back again every time, well, eventually I knew something more was going on. That being said, I didn't understand it, and I didn't really want to question it if it helped her. It wasn't my curiosity, or the growing sense of unease that I was a part of something strange and unnatural. It wasn't even the tickle in the back of my head warning that this wasn't just magical. It was somehow wrong. No, what caused me to finally talk to Aunt Vivian about it was the truth. I was confronting more and more every time she opened the door. You're dying. Aunt Vivian stopped sipping her coffee as she studied me over the rim of the cup. We'd finished this round of pruning that morning, but she still looked thin and worn out, aren't we all? I frowned at her. That's not what I mean. I'm not stupid. I know these pictures are helping you somehow, helping you fight. Whatever it is that's trying to take you. She didn't say anything, so I went on. But I also know that you're losing. Even with taking more pictures and pruning more often, it isn't bringing you back like it was. Sitting her cup down, she gave me a slight nod. All right, so what's your point? Because if this is your attempt at a pep talk, you really suck at it. I couldn't help but smile a little, even though I felt like I could barely breathe. It's not. I don't understand how this works, and I don't really care, so long as it helps you. But is there anything else we can do? To make it work better, or to heal you or something? I saw something shining in her eyes, maybe a brief sheen of tears, and then she was smiling at me. She looked so beautiful in that moment that I laughed. It didn't seem fair that she could be so wonderful and have to face so much pain and worry. When I was young, I almost died. Your mother may have told you this, and I won't bore you with all the details, but I got a very bad, very aggressive disease that kills most people pretty quick, and I could feel it working on me, like vines tightening around another plant until it's dead. I was scared, of course, and I'd tried to do anything to distract myself. I couldn't play much with how I was feeling, but I still made myself walk around some every day, as though with enough exercise I could keep my limbs from betraying me. I'd gotten an instant camera for my birthday that year, and I got the idea of taking pictures as I went around the neighborhood. I took a couple of pictures of animals, but something told me to take pictures of people instead. So that's exactly what I did. The next day I felt better, so I went out walking again, this time further, in part because I had more energy, in part because I somehow knew I needed to collect different people. The day after that, I felt even better, and that afternoon, I asked your grandfather to get me more film on his way home from work. This went on for another week, and by the end of it, I felt like I'd never been sick. If anything, I felt better than I ever had, though I tried to hide it a little. I wasn't trying to lie, not really. It was more just instinct that I didn't want to stand out more than was necessary. After that, I took less pictures, but I still took them. I'd go a few days, and then I'd get the urge. The one time I ignored it, I started feeling sick again, and I didn't need that lesson twice. I was like you, I didn't know what was happening, but I didn't care so long as I stayed healthy, and I did. For a long time I did. But this thing, I think of it like a tiger sometimes. It's always there, tracking me, trailing me, waiting to jump on me and bring me down. I was 14 when my legs started going again. I took more pictures, and I could feel it helping a little, but it wasn't nearly enough. The tiger had me now, and it was going to drag me down to some place I couldn't come out of. And then one day, our grandpa came to visit. He was a preacher in another state, and it was rare that we ever saw him, but I guess my mother had told him that I likely didn't have a lot of time left. He came and sat with me for a couple of hours, talking to me, praying, telling me that God loved me. He was a nice enough man, but he smelled like cloves, and I didn't really know him. I just wanted him to go so I could sleep. He was about to go when he noticed the camera on my bedside table, asked me if I liked taking pictures, if I would take a picture of him. I wanted to say no, but something inside stopped me. Instead, I picked up the camera, framed him, and hit the button. Then I hit it again. I knew right away it was different. My skin was tingling as I waved to him and pretended to drift to sleep. I waited until I heard everyone going outside to see him off, to see if I was well again. I fell to the floor. I had healed myself, partially. I wasn't dying anymore, not for the moment, but my legs were still numb. I tried over the next several weeks to get them back too. I took more pictures, but I always held off from taking more than one. Why? I couldn't help but interrupt. Why wouldn't you take double pictures, or a dozen pictures, if that helped more? You might be able to walk. She nodded with a rueful smile. Yeah, probably so. But the reason I didn't was because after my grandfather left our house that day, he died. Just stopped. It was only an hour down the road from where I'd taken his pictures, and his car hadn't even really wrecked. It just rolled into a ditch after he stopped living. They tried to claim it was a heart attack at the time, but I got the death certificate later. Indeterminate cause of death. I guess the medical examiner didn't know to look for curses. I frowned at her. You don't know you cursed him. Shrugging, she took another sip of coffee. I know that he died because of me, and that I benefited from it. I know I'm doing a lesser version of the same to everyone I take pictures of, draining a bit of their life so I can live. I felt my stomach clench painfully. How do you know that? She raised an eyebrow. You know? Why do you think I removed and destroyed the photos of people who have died? They don't help me once they're dead. In fact, the opposite. I sometimes wonder if the reason it hit me again so hard when I was 14 was because I hadn't known to prune. That idea didn't occur to me until a month or two after my grandfather died. It felt like I was fighting death, after all, or bargaining with it. And anyone who was already dead was just more weight against me. So I started weeding out the people that were dead. It was just a few back then. Right away I felt stronger. Giving a short, bitter laugh, she went on. And it's not that I didn't think about taking more double pictures back then, but I was a child, and I felt good except for my legs. So I told myself it was good enough. And for a time, it was. I swallowed. So you never tried taking two again? Vivian smiled at me. I did, once. I was in my late 20s. My health was okay, but I was very depressed and lonely. I wanted a full life, and I convinced myself I was rejecting a gift that I'd been given. So I started watching the newspapers. Found a man who had been let out on bail after killing his wife and child. It didn't take long before I had my pictures, and he was dead. Did it work? She waggled her hand back and forth. Yes and no. I definitely felt stronger and more alive, but I still couldn't walk. That's what made me realize it wasn't just the second picture and the dying that made it more powerful. It was the connection. I'd gotten more from him dying, but far less than when my blood relative had died and brought me back from the edge. But even my grandfather, he was kin, but I barely knew him. Her smile widened. Imagine if it was someone that I was kin to and I loved. I felt my skin grow cold. You want to use me? And Vivian's smile faded away. What would you say if I did? Swallowing, I nodded. I mean, yeah, I don't want to die, but if it helps you that much, maybe it'd be okay. She looked almost angry as her lips drew into a thin line. Get up then. Go to your room, and lie down on the bed. Nodding again, I stood up shakily and did as she told me. When I was on the bed, I looked up to see her in the doorway to the room, camera in her lap. Lifting it, she snapped my photo once. You shouldn't be so quick to give your life away. Take it from someone that's fought for it every day for a very long time. Her face softened. I do love you for it though. Enough to not take a second picture. Are you sure? She raised a hand. Yes, but I do need you to do something for me. Toss me your phone. I'm going to lock you in here. There's a bag in the bottom of the closet with bottles of water and health bars, and you have a bathroom. In 4 days, someone will come and let you out, but I need you to stay in here until that happens, okay? Throwing her my phone, she caught it deftly as I stared at her. A bag? Have you been planning on locking me in here? Viv laughed softly. I have several plans all the time, even if I don't know exactly when, or if I'll need them. This was one of them, though I'd have called it a long shot. Still, I'm very happy it worked out this way. She raised an eyebrow. Will you trust me and do as I ask? I nodded. You're not going off to kill yourself or something, right? Chuckling, she shook her head. You haven't been paying attention. I love living too much for that, but you're right. Things can't keep going like they are, and I've been patient long enough. It's time to harvest what's been planted. With that, she shut the door and locked me in. I thought about breaking out over the next few days, but I wanted to keep my promise, so I didn't. And true to her word, on the 4th day, a guy I'd never seen before opened the door and told me my phone was on the kitchen table before walking back out. When I got my phone, I had several missed messages. A couple from friends, one from a girl I had been talking to lately, and several from my mother. It was the last few of those that really caught my attention. Are you going to be around this weekend? You aren't answering your phone. Vivian is throwing this party well. It's at her house, so maybe I'm throwing it. But she wants all the family there. Your sister is coming, and so is Uncle Andy and his family. Viv will be heartbroken if you aren't there. Viv is about to start family pictures. Where are you? I stared at my phone. The last text was from the night before. Oh fuck. The official report, which came weeks later, said that everyone must have died from some kind of gas leak, though there was no sign of anything like that the next morning when police arrived to do a wellness check at Uncle Andy's wife's request. Seems she got a stomach bug at the last second and hadn't made the trip after all, though their 2 little girls had. Not that Vivian would mind that much. Aunt Allison wasn't blood after all, and they'd never been very close. As for Viv, there was no sign. Her bank accounts were empty, her photo albums were gone, and there was no trace of her at the party, where most of her family had died. Well, that's not entirely true, because amid the dead bodies and decaying party food that filled the living room and kitchen of my parents' house, one thing stood out. An old wheelchair, left behind like a discarded cocoon.